Hi and welcome to this week's Ben TV. We've got a rather serious subject this week. It's suicide in our community. We have with us conveners of a community response to eliminating suicide course and a young member of Minus 18 who's studying social work amongst many other good things. So I'll start with the conveners of the cause course, Jed and Lynette, and the other member of the team today is Claudia. Jed, tell us a little bit about cause. How did it start? Why was the program developed in the first place?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stephen, and thanks for having us on.
Not a problem.
Because you came along to the cause course, so you got first-hand experience of it.
Yeah.
Cause is really a community response to eliminating suicide. So it grew out of a regional perspective. There was a town in Tasmania that experienced a couple of suicides, and the town started asking, what is going on here?
Yeah.
And they noticed that there was this real culture of not being able to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so a health service there started up a training process where they invited community members in. They trained up a number of community members to give the training, so it became self-sustaining.
Yeah.
And eventually everyone in the town went through this one-day course where they learned how to check if someone is thinking about completing suicide, if they're thinking about taking their own life, and then being able to say, hey, are you okay? Are you thinking of taking your life? Checking in with that person, and then mapping out how immediate and how to respond to that, because it's scary hearing yes, but it's also very powerful. So being able to know how you can respond and what intervention measures there are, and how quickly you need to respond for that person. So that's really the essence of the program.
And Lynette, where did it grow from there? How did it come to Melbourne? How did it come to our community from the rural beginnings in Tasmania?
So the company I work for, Success Works, actually was commissioned to do an evaluation of the course to just see what impact it was having and whether it was being effective.
Yep.
And through that evaluation we got to know a lot more about the cause program itself, and became really interested in the idea of how could we apply this on the mainland, as they would probably call it, and also how could we start these conversations in companies. So I think one of the really lovely things about the program is that it encourages groups of people to do this together so that they can keep having conversations about this issue and keep supporting each other while they're noticing a workmate or a colleague or a friend or a family member, and when they go off and they have that conversation and say, so are you feeling down? Do you need some help? Are you thinking about suicide?
And, it
and
really
someone
is
says
scary
yes.
to get that yes.
Oh, absolutely, yes, yes. So to be able to come back to a community, a network of people who are all thinking the same thing and know the stats and aren't afraid to talk about it and really willing to tackle it. We became interested in how could we bring that conversation into, say, organisations and companies and community groups, and
Cool. So there were some figures that were brought out in the course that I did, the one-day course with you two guys, and that was an horrendous day for me personally, as you both know. But the thing I found surprising is that it's not just the young folk that complete suicide. Some of the people that do this in their 70s, they're receiving healthcare. What's happening there?
Yeah. Look, the statistics aren't well known, and they're also not exactly accurate, because a lot of deaths may go unreported. It's a long straight road and someone drives into a tree and it's not reported as a suicide. So the statistics are just the tip of the iceberg. But what the statistics show is that it's around periods of loss and change. Middle-aged women, and then slightly older men, And then around the younger years, especially in our community, the stats for our community are shocking, to be honest. There are various studies, but some are where the youth, isolated youth, especially in rural areas, are up to 14 times more likely than their peers to attempt suicide. And for bisexual people, some Australian studies have even shown it's up to 30 times more likely than their peers. So it's a real issue for our community that I'm really glad that we're talking about today, which is why we partnered up and ran the training pro bono for some gay and lesbian community organisations for their leaders and for their key volunteers. We're hoping to get a second day happening for that, because we found that first day just to be fantastic, and there are a number of people from minus 18 there who just really soaked it up and really seemed to get a lot from it.
The minus 18 people that were at the course I did, they were just superb. They were just on top of everything. They were just like bang, bang, bang with absolutely everything. So you should be very proud of your organisation's part in this show as well. We're coming close to the end of this segment, but I just want to touch on what you're studying and why, and how this fits in, and why we've got you on the show here today, please, Claudia.
Yep, I'm a board member for Minus 18, which is a youth-led organisation in the community that I hope a lot of people are familiar with. We're run by youth for youth to provide social support and events and an online community. Personally, I'm also a social work student, so it's an area that's very interesting to me. I've done a lot of study on youth suicide and prevention. Yeah, it is a tough subject to face. And the reason I said the day was interesting for me is because at lunchtime on the day when I did the course, I found out that a friend of mine had completed suicide the day before. So from the morning, where I'm all pumped and all ready to learn and look after my volunteers here and see if there's anyone at risk here, to suddenly in the afternoon be, 40% more likely myself to complete suicide in the next year or so. That was just mind-blowing statistic that had to hit me in the gut, it just really, and it still does. It still does. But
one of the things I remember from that day, and it was a tough day for you, and one of the things I remember was chatting to you, and I hope you don't mind me sharing the conversation.
No, please.
But it was around where you said, I was saying, are you sure you want to stay? Feel free to leave, you don't have to stay. And you said, no, it makes me even more sure that I want to stay here today. So I found that really powerful. One of the things that you were mentioning before, and you might notice that we're talking about completing suicide and not committing suicide.
That's a very good point.
Committing seems to connote some kind of sin,
or criminality.
Or criminality, exactly. And we always like to say complete, because it's not a sin, and it's something that we can openly talk about.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, that's all for this segment. We'll take a break at Ben TV, and we'll be back with some more after the short break. Hi, and welcome back to Ben TV. This week we're touching on the difficult subject of suicide in our community, and I'm just going to pay some attention to Claudia for a moment, because we didn't pay much attention to her last segment. Claudia, we were talking statistics before. Do you have any statistics that you know offhand of people 18 to 25, like minus 18 sort of group, that you can share with us?
Yep, unfortunately it doesn't start at 18 for our statistics. We've got even upwards from 12 to 25 in terms of the youth depression and mental health issues, which is really scary to think about, but I think people are coming out and realising their sexuality a lot younger these days. A lot of what the research tells us is that it's not being homosexual or bisexual or transgender that makes someone suicidal, but it's the homophobic violence or abuse that occurs. And unfortunately about 80% of that is being shown to happen at school, which should be a safe environment for young people. The other thing is feeling a sense of social isolation and not being connected to a community. So I guess that's where our work with Minus 18 comes in.
Yeah, good work. So if it's the schools where they're subjected to this bullying behaviour, how does minus 18 help eliminate or minimise that for the youth of the community that are coming through?
We actually work sort of on a number of levels. We have been involved directly in schools. We have our collaboration with the Safe Schools Coalition.
Yep.
Hopefully everyone's familiar with that.
Yep.
Providing training and I guess just identification of safe schools for young same-sex attracted and genderqueer youth. We also have been involved in running school formals through minus 18. It's the equivalent of what a school formal would be, but you're allowed to take your same-sex partner.
Nice.
So I guess our aim is to work primarily from the outside in rather than going into schools. But we're certainly directing a lot of our work towards school-age young people.
And the Safe School program is a wonderful program from what I've heard of it too. So I guess with coming out, there's this emotional sort of river. They've got some coping mechanisms, they haven't got many. That might slow that flow down, but if the bullying just sort of pushes that water faster and faster, is that sort of what's happening for these youth?
Yeah, unfortunately I think it is. I think a lot of young people feel they're not supported by their families or their peers and they have nowhere to go, and they're just experiencing, on one hand the normal adolescent confusion and changes in their life, but on top of that this mounting, I guess, poorer mental health outcomes, and people are just getting pushed over the edge, which is just devastating. I mean, young people haven't even begun to live yet, and they're already taking their own lives and self-harming.
Yeah. So self-harming, Lynette, and pushing them over the edge, that wall of emotion, that sort of is what Cause touches on too in a way, isn't it?
It is. Some of the things that we talk about to get people familiar with is the idea of noticing it before it becomes such a big issue.
Yep.
So being able to have the conversation before it gets to this awful point where it's suicide or nothing.
Yeah.
So noticing some of the warning signs, noticing some of the danger signs. And in particular, I think one of the ones that really struck me in a big way was the one that you mentioned a bit earlier, that idea of the 40 times risk.
Right.
And that statistic is a piece of research that was done saying that anyone who's been in contact with someone who has completed suicide is 40 times more likely to be thinking about and going to take that action for themselves.
Yeah, I know, that was really scary for me, learning that half an hour before I found out that I was
absolutely.
actually 40% more. That was just, just
yeah.
mind-blowing sort of stuff.
Yeah,
But I'm used
the
to
reality
sort
of the reality of that was very clear in the room.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important thing. It's something that people don't think about necessarily, that if someone else has suicided that's a close family member or a really good friend, if they have, then that
just puts it sort of from the back burner onto a slow front burner, and somebody turns up the gas on that burner, and it's just
So one of the things to remember is in terms of that close person, it can be an idol, so it can be their pop idol, but one of the other things is that it doesn't hurt talking about it. So although in small towns you can see that that 40-time rule applies, where sometimes you'll have multiple suicides in a row, and that is that 40 times rule where there's someone's close to them. But that's not to say that it's not okay to talk about it. And the press guidelines have actually just been amended, where suicide can be talked about openly. It's actually positive to talk about it openly, and that's why it's really great to be talking about it today.
Cool. I just had a thought that went through my head that's just now completely gone. Well,
the thing that I was also going to say was that what's really important is to think about being able to be comfortable to talk about it, and in my experience, when I have talked to people about it, they've actually said that they felt relieved, that it's been this awful thing that's been in their head that they haven't been able to get out of their head. Talking about it out loud has made it really a relief for them. So that's, I think, a really important thing to think about, that it's not a dangerous thing at all.
And there was that the suicides with the 6 school children in the United States last year, the Wear Purple for a Day campaign. Did minus 18 embrace that? I know I did. Everything was purple. I still wear purple. I still love wearing purple. But yeah, I suppose minus 18 would have encourage that? And
Yeah, look, Minus 18 does get on board a lot of those things, and even I know a lot of our community members involved at the events and on the website and all of that, they often get on board with things like that. And also International Day Against Homophobia, we have a big role in that as well, which is really good. But yeah, I've certainly seen a lot of Minus members getting involved and wearing the purple. And
and I know on Facebook at one stage they had the Stop Homophobic Bullying on Facebook badges that you could attach to your Facebook photo, and I had one on mine, my red smoking jacket or something, I don't know, but just rather me, but just with the badge there as well. So yeah, that was cool.
I can remember one of my experiences of Minus 18 when I was younger was just that real sense. It's the breaking down of isolation, and I'm also on the board of Joy 94.9, and that's one of our purpose statements is breaking down isolation. I think it's just so important in our community to reach out, let people know that they're not alone. And I can just remember going to Minus 18 and my mind was just blowing and just there's so many people like us and that it's normal and just being able to meet people.
You walk into a room and there's 500 other same-sex attracted or genderqueer young people, and it's something you go from thinking you're the only person experiencing this to seeing 500 others at a dance party. It's fantastic.
Well, that's really good. Unfortunately, once again we have to take a break, and we'll be back with more about suicide and other related issues when we return with Ben TV. Hi, and welcome back to Ben TV. I guess by now you know what we're talking about. If you haven't, then I hope you're taping it and you can play us back and find out what we are talking about. Lynette, where did you want to lead us from here? I'm just sort of winging the last bit just so we can get our message finally out there to the whole community that we're trying to embrace, talking about it, I guess, isn't it really what we're trying to say?
Well, Stephen, I was thinking about how it has been in the past a really taboo subject, the idea of talking about suicide, suicidality, even that idea of contemplating suicide. It's
and
been
self-harm as well.
Yep, any of those things, depression, any of those things have been such a taboo subject in past years. But my sense is that there's a growing understanding in the community that hasn't been a helpful way to go, and that it's far more helpful to be talking about it and be resourced about how you might be able to help someone if they do start talking about this, being open to hearing it, being open to talk about it. And there are so many more resources now than there ever have been. And the Cause is one of those resources for people. And through the training, what we do is try and identify for people the kinds of resources that are out there in the community. And Minus 18.
And from memory, you also make us identify our own.
Yep.
Which was very helpful. Very helpful indeed. I'm a bit lost again, but
one of the things that SuccessWorks is looking to do is look for partners to be able to provide the training pro bono in our community. So not just for our community organisations, those volunteers and leaders of those organisations, but also more broadly. The concept of Cause is to build it up where the whole community it becomes a self-sustaining system basically in the community.
Like the town in Tasmania.
Yeah, and they've actually done it, Cause have actually done it around Australia in a number of rural communities. And so we're looking for partners to be able to do it in our community as well. Another thing I'll mention for people out there, and they're obviously reaching Ben TV, which is great. It's a fantastic way to break down isolation. Another one's Joy, joy.org.au. It's a radio station that's 24/7, and it really breaks down isolation as well. You can access it around the world.
Yeah, I know Joy helps me through many days.
Well, it's surprising. With Joy, they've done a mapping exercise. A uni did a large mapping exercise for gay men's health, and they found that it was actually one of the biggest support mechanisms in our community. Even though it's not necessarily a support organisation, people listed it as being a support. So it's an important element. And Minus 18.
Yeah, well, I guess it just comes back to feeling like you're not alone, and that sense of social isolation versus social connectedness. It's certainly research has shown that feeling like part of a community, like Joy or part of the gay community, really, really can act as a protective factor for depression and self-harm and suicide.
Another one I'll mention is Switchboard. because Switchboard's all around the country, and it's peer telephone counselling. They also offer a number of referral services to other mental health organisations or community groups or support groups where you get to meet other people. So Switchboard's another really important one.
Yeah, I know there are programs in the mental health system as well. There's Scream, which is musical therapy and all sorts of things that they've got under their belt as well. So there are ways to get out there and express, even, you know, in some way what you're going through. So I guess in wrapping up, the thing that really shocked me about the statistics in the course was that it's not just the young, it's not just the middle-aged women, it's not just the men who are more efficient at actually completing suicide than the actual women who quite often attempt, more often. It's the older guys that are having to de-gay their house to receive appropriate home care, for instance, and the like that Joy's been talking about more recently, and the like of that too. So if you're any of those things, just reach out and talk to somebody. You know, if somebody comes to you and says, look, are you thinking of self-harm? Are you at all contemplating completing suicide? And you get that yes, or you have that yes to give, don't be afraid to get it. Don't be afraid to hear it. You know, I think that's a huge message that the course gave to me.
And use your communities as well. There's actually been some positive aspects. I know I've done some research recently. The western suburbs have been traditionally very, homophobic, and even a lot of the local councils are getting like queer groups together, and
awesome.
It's not all bad news. There are organisations out there.
It's a lovely point. It's a message of hope, I think.
It's a
is
message
what
of
we're,
hope.
yeah.
It is.
Yeah. So if you take away anything tonight, just know that you're not alone, and we are a community, and that's all that really matters. Okay, so I'd just like to thank both Lynette and Jed for coming from Successworth and talking about cause, and of course Claudia from -18, who's doing all this wonderful research and feeding it back into her own organisation and the like. And we'd like you to come back again tomorrow or next week, or whenever you're able to replay this tape, and certainly join us at the same time next week for another great episode of Bent TV.